Good afternoon, everyone. It has been a super exciting conference, and I am so pleased and thanks to all of you for being here with us in this session. We have phenomenal presentations. The three of my colleagues from Ashoka that I have gotten to know through this exchange. Dr. Madeline Simon from the University of Maryland has a phenomenal program. She's the Associate Dean there. It's a Changemaker campus, and she will be presenting. And then along with Willie Oppenheim, who is the founder, president, and CEO of Prakash. And with him is joining Dr. Benjamin Lowe from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. The powerful team. So just relax. You've got a super presentation coming up. And with that, I hand over to Willie for the acknowledgement.
Great. So thanks everyone again for being here. And I know we've all heard a lot of different land acknowledgements as part of this conference and elsewhere. I wanted to do something a little different and do what I'm calling a digital territory acknowledgement, which is to say, although of course we should acknowledge the indigenous people who lived in this country before many of us were here. There's also something to be said more broadly about, I think, for me, one of the purposes of a land acknowledgement is to recognize the processes of exclusion and marginalization that we are, in which we are complicit, often without realizing it, and to remind ourselves of who else is unable to access a given space. So I wanted to kind of attempt that just in the digital frame by making the obvious but important point that this conference is not happening in Minnesota. It's happening in a digital space, which is really beautiful and allows all of us to connect across so many differences. But needless to say, there are so many people in the world, and including in the United States, who can't access this because they don't have access to the internet or because it's too expensive. And with that in mind, I just wanted to acknowledge that and hope that we can all dedicate ourselves to broadening that access, along with doing all the other work we're doing, just to recognizing that we still have a long way to go before we can consider this kind of space to be truly open and participatory.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. A great acknowledgement. Thank you, Willie. And I want everyone to know that, let me introduce this session. The key thing is why this session? Why should we be concerned about ethics and ethics of community engagement? And Ashoka is all about engagement, about diversity, about inclusion. And so this session fits right in with community engagement across differences of culture and power. If we're talking about diversity and inclusion, culture and power come right in there. You learn, so you learn about the commodification, the placements, the curricular scaffolding, and the research that goes on with, who gets to do research, who gets research done to them, and so on. Those are some very critical questions that we need to not only ask, but then also research on and talk about it. And the learning goals of our session, the learning outcomes, basically to prepare our students for understanding the context in which they're entering, transcending otherness through shared collaboration and learning. And then the main thing is the projects that are living beyond the four walls of the typical classroom. And you will see from both of these powerful presentations how they have been able to achieve that. So with that, I hand over to Dr. Madeline Simon, who has done phenomenally, reaching not only beyond the class, but beyond the borders. So Dr. Madeline, the floor is now for you.
Oh, well, thank you so much for that nice introduction, Saleha. So I'm going to jump right into telling you about an example of an educational project that explores the questions of our session. So So I'm a professor of architecture, and I teach a global classroom called Bridging the Gap Studio. This brings together architecture students in Iraq designing a project in the United States, and architecture students in the United States designing a project in Iraq. And I want to say that this has been a journey of discovery for me just as much as the students. So I've been at this for the last 6 years now, with 5 classes of students in both countries. And I would say that I have been learning right alongside the students. I came to this in a completely accidental way, and knowing nothing. And so the insights that I'm going to share with you today are really my insights as a student through this process, just as much as a professor. So we have some learning objectives here. One is to prepare students for global practice. So we are starting from the premise that the students on both sides of the planet here are going to be engaged in their professional lives in working at a distance. Certainly the current situation is pointing out how very important that is. And they're going to be engaged in serving people through their profession, serving people who are unlike themselves. So it's critically important then, as part of professional education, to teach the students both how to collaborate with people all over the world, and also how to delve into cultures that they may never have the chance to experience in person in order to design in ways that truly serve people. And then next, how do we transcend otherness? So how can we design educational experiences that build a shared culture across geography and time? And finally, how can we share that innovation and create a sustainable model that begins on campus, but goes out into the world with a life of its own? So let's go to the next slide. Saleha, yeah, thank you. So the project came about really, it arose from the question of how do you turn former enemies into friends? I think I mentioned that my involvement here was really unexpected and accidental. The project was cooked up by a young Iraqi-American architect working in a multinational firm. She won funding through her firm's in-house Kickstarter project for a proposal that would build peace between young Americans and Iraqis by using the shared profession of architecture to bring these two groups together. So I've got a bit of a timeline here. The war between the US and Iraq officially ended in 2011, and we began our project in 2016. So this was the situation in which Iraqis and Americans really knew each other through the media, and those images in the media were images of conflict, war, destruction, enmity. And so this Iraqi-American had the idea that we could create a whole different set of images that would build peace really through these individual contacts. Okay, moving on then. So who are we? So we are a group of professionals. So Zara is the young woman who originated this idea. And her colleagues at this multinational architecture firm, we are faculty, kind of two primary faculty, one in the US and one in Iraq. And the group has essentially expanded over the years to include more. And then we are, at this point, over 100 students who've participated in this program, and many of us have stayed connected over the years. Okay, let's go on. So the big concept here is that we share a professional culture. So here we are in different parts of the world. We're prevented from traveling physically to each other's cities, which is a more traditional way for architecture students to get to know other cultures. So how can we leverage this shared professional culture to build the relationships? So what do? So we engage in parallel activities. So we essentially trade our capital cities with one another. We engage in projects then. We begin each academic year by getting to know a part of our own capital cities and creating a body of information in the way that architects do. We call it site analysis. So we each do a site analysis for a carefully selected sector of our own capital cities, Washington, DC, and Baghdad. And then the students exchange information. So the Iraqi students present a piece of Baghdad to the Americans present a piece of Washington, DC to the Iraqi students. And we intentionally pick parallel places. This year we picked these sites that bridge rivers, and in bridging the rivers, they bring together different districts. And so in each of these projects, we've got some very parallel situations: underutilized riverfronts, pedestrian dangers, income inequality, segregation, lack of public space, lack of affordable housing. So right off the bat, we begin to understand that even though we're living in very different places and different cultures, we're dealing with many of the same problems. And so, we begin to build up a kind of shared sense of purpose. How can we deal with these problems in each other's places? So here are the students then, they're visiting the sites that they're going to describe to one another. So we begin to get to know each other then by just exchanging these images of ourselves doing these parallel activities and exchanging the information. So we're, sort of building up a shared professional culture here by engaging in similar activities and also using the professional tools, this kind of shared language of architecture. So what we're seeing here is work produced by the students at Al Nahrain University in Baghdad and the students at the University of Maryland. So the work looks very, very similar. Okay, let's keep moving on. So we engage in this activity called tactical urbanism, where we pick out a particular spot in the districts that we're investigating, and we make a proposal for one quick intervention that could catalyze social change. So here in Baghdad, the Iraqi students are looking at how the abandoned riverfront could offer a respite from the heat. And in DC, the US students were looking at how school parking lots could be repurposed as public spaces for community members to socialize. So here, the students are working in their own cities, and then they cross over, they switch. So in this project then, the students are now making proposals for each other's cities. So we can see that some of the Iraqi students keyed into the idea that we have food deserts in DC. So they're looking at ways to create some healthy nutrition in their counterpart city. And the students at University of Maryland, they picked up on the idea that it's extremely hot in the summertime in Baghdad, up to around 120 degrees Fahrenheit rather constantly. So how can they help the residents in Baghdad to beat this extreme summer heat? So here, we've got empathy for one another's situations. And then moving on here, let's keep going. And yeah, here we are. So I've shown you a little bit about how we're sharing professional culture, but we're also trying to make sure that we're going beyond professional culture. And one of the great ways to connect is through food. So what we were seeing in that past slide was the US students teaching the Iraqis how to make grilled cheese sandwiches, and the Iraqi students teaching us how to make fig pastries. And I can tell you that once we received that recipe and tried those fig pastries, they were so incredibly delicious that we felt pretty embarrassed about our grilled cheese sandwiches. So anyway, we developed greater respect through cooking. So in this time when our world has been turned upside down, I asked the US students, do we still feel connected despite the social distancing that we're practicing? And this is a rather interesting time for us because we're typically set up to have these kind of methods of distance communication in between the US and Iraq. But in typical times, the US students are together in a conference room, the Iraqi students are together in a conference room. But now all of us are spread out at home. And so I really wonder to what extent the students feel like they've developed a connection, even though they're unable to gather together in some of the customary ways. We've then been building this cross-cultural community over a period of 6 years. I'm wondering what happens, how can we make this continue? Because it has, to a very large extent, been dependent on the, I guess I would say, personalities of the original people involved. We've grown the group, but at the same time, the kind of primary players are the ones who keep this moving forward. So how do we give this life of its own? So I went through a list of the ways in which I think that we're taking this out into the world. So if we go to the next slide, I'll tell you about some of those ways. So we, in the first year, the professional firm sponsored a design competition. The strongest students who were the winners all got to have an internship at the architecture firm. So we brought 2 of the students over from Iraq and 2 of the students from the US. And this was an opportunity to actually get to meet physically in the professional space. And so it deepened this sense of bridging the cultures through the connection of the professional culture. Then next, please. Then once we had the opportunity to go through one cycle, the Iraqi faculty were able to point up some of the deficits in the Iraqi architectural education. So we got a grant from a foundation called the IREX that brought 4 Iraqi faculty over for a workshop that I put on along with a couple of my students who'd been part of the project. And so this was a way to use our collaboration to enhance architectural education in Iraq. The idea was that these faculty would go back to their 2 different universities in Baghdad, teach the students who would then become the faculty who would fan out around the country of Iraq and bring this, sort of globalized education back with them. So here are just a couple glimpses of us working together. And, I have to say that this was a two-way education because, we certainly learned a lot through this opportunity to teach. We exhibited the work of the students in Washington, D.C., so essentially introducing the local professional community to these ideas about how to bridge the cultural gap. And then we were able to also bring this to a much wider audience. We collaborated on applying for a studio, this competition called the Studio Prize, given by Architect Magazine. And we were just unbelievably thrilled that we succeeded because this brought the project to the attention of all the subscribers, which is over 100,000 architects. So it was a way to take this idea about using design to catalyze cross-cultural collaboration. So hopefully this will have inspired other people to pick up similar projects. And then we also want to stress that we're using this work to address the United Nations 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. I think that if we can sort of broaden the significance of this beyond, sort of building successive generations of students who, who feel like they participate in this shared culture, but we can think about how we can leverage that to improve the planet for more people. I think that's important. And let's see, I think there's one more here. So we're trying to sustain this community that we've created. Somehow Facebook turned out to be a really great way to communicate between the US and Iraq. And it seemed to be a very great way to both create a kind of visible professional community, but also to sort of tip this into the territory of friendship as well. And so over the past 6 years, we've got over 100 students who are members of the group, all of the faculty, a number of these, students. So we've built up a supportive group, and hopefully this is the sort of thing that could continue to grow.
So great. Thank you.
Is that the last slide? Maybe let me just say a quick word or two to wrap this up. I think I told you that I went on this journey of discovery along with the students. So when I began, I was very aware of difference. And I went in with really a lot of fear and trepidation about how I could possibly model for the students, my aspiration to connect cross-culturally in, with the proper, ethical attitude of respect and, humility, I guess I would say, shedding a sense of first world privilege and, really just trying to fundamentally, connect person to person. And I guess that I would say that after 6 years, the professional connection has absolutely come to the fore for me, because every time I connect with my faculty counterparts and with the students in Baghdad who I consider my students, I mean, it's just so obvious to me that we are all in this together. And I guess I would say that the current situation in which we're all isolated and working from home just points this up even further. When we're rectangles on the screen to one another, I think the differences really fall away, and the what we all share together comes to the fore. I think I started off by talking about the kind of accidental way in which I got involved in this work. I'm going to pass you on to the next presenter, Willie Oppenheim, who has created a really extraordinary platform that enables people without these kind of accidental connections to get together to engage in projects with people around the world. So let me pass this on to...
Great. Thank you so much, Madeline. And yeah, I'm Willie. It's really nice to be here, and thanks everyone for coming. I want to tell you about an organization called Prakash, which I've been leading for about 15 years. But actually, Saleha, if you don't mind going back to the very beginning where we outlined the key questions of the session, I actually want to just return to those because I think it'll help us all kind of reorient, if that's possible. If not, then no problem. Yeah, there we go. So great. Saleha touched on this, but I just want to kind of go a little deeper. So look, everyone in this session, and I think everyone in the Ashoka community more broadly, cares about community engagement. They care about connecting with people outside of their immediate university or their immediate backyard, and creating positive change. But something we think about a lot at Prakash, and I think all of us in this presentation, is all of the many ways that those efforts can frankly go wrong and can do more harm than good. Good intentions are not enough. We've all heard this before, but especially when we're crossing significant differences of culture and power, how do we make sure that we're doing so in an ethical and productive way, and that our good efforts aren't sort of going to waste, or in some cases even exacerbating the same social problems that we're trying to address. And a few of these bullet points are kind of what we see as some of the key questions here. First of all, we need to make sure that the relationships at play are not being distorted by incentives of, we need to ask that, who's making money here, or how might these relationships be getting distorted? And then the curricular scaffolding is a huge piece, because it's one thing to say, oh yeah, our students are going out and doing experiential learning, but we can't just assume that they're going to learn from their experiences. There needs to be, I think, some real pedagogical intentionality there. And research is another part of this, but so often when people go out and do social innovation research or community-based research, those who have historically been marginalized and disempowered become sort of the powerless objects of research. They get research, but they're not the ones doing research. They don't have much agency there. So this is not just about Prakash. These are larger themes that I think all of us are exploring in this session. And we just heard from Madeline her fantastic example of, it seems like in that case, the relationships between students in Baghdad and Washington, D.C. or Maryland are really authentic. No one is purchasing that, so to speak. There's mutual interest being served. There's clearly a lot of curricular scaffolding. And it seems that both sides are kind of engaging in their own research. So I think that's a great example. And now I want to tell you about Prakash. And as Madeline said, I'm going to sort of, Madeline's case gives us sort of a case study of one program. And now I'm going to talk about Prakash, which is really a broader platform. We partner with a lot of different universities and other nonprofits to help them do this kind of thing and do it better. So broadly speaking, Prakash is a nonprofit that facilitates relationships, dialogue, and learning between social change agents around the world. What does that actually mean? We'll take a look at the next slide. So there's two main pillars of Prakash I want you to understand. The first is that Prakash curates a network of partner organizations around the world. This is about 175 autonomous social impact organizations. And the key point is these are not Prakash projects. We don't go and set up schools or set up projects. These are locally led organizations that choose to join our network. We have a very rigorous vetting process. Once an organization becomes an Prakash partner, then anyone can apply to volunteer or intern with them via our website. And this is really key to the way we think about ethical engagement, because any model that is premised on you sort of purchase your internship or you buy your volunteer experience, we have found over the years being in this space that the incentives just don't really work. They don't make sense in that case. And you have a lot of companies that are essentially selling a tourism package, hoping that it sort of aligns with their social mission, but so often that leads to mission drift. And so we're pretty committed to this idea of we partner with social impact organizations. We support them in various ways. We're not interested in sort of trying to sell a tourism product. That's the first pillar of what we do. We also support those partners with a fundraising platform and lots of other stuff, but I'm not going to get into that. The second major aspect of what we do is we have built a highly customizable online learning platform called Edge. So this gets into that point around curricular scaffolding. But we partner with lots of different universities, and we often hear people say, oh yeah, well, students are going to do this social innovation internship or this impact project. And yeah, they have a one-day pre-orientation or something. And we just really feel that that is not enough, and that there's so much to be gained from in-depth, rigorous pre-departure training and mentorship. So we offer that via our Edge platform, and we customize that for lots of different audiences. And so, for example, Madeline was talking about the Facebook group that she uses to connect students in the US and in Baghdad. And that's certainly one option, but we have created this platform that's highly customizable and that does that sort of thing, connecting students in different places, creating a real cohort learning experience for students who might be geographically dispersed, or maybe they all start on the same campus and then they're going out to do projects and they come back together. So this just gives you a glimpse of our how someone can browse partners on our website, and again, connect directly with these organizations. You're not like buying an internship from Prakash, you're applying directly to them. And to us, that might sound like just a simple website functionality, but that really does get into these deeper ethical questions of how we think about what does really just and inclusive and mutually empowering community engagement look like. From our perspective, it doesn't look like buying a trip from a middleman. It looks like connecting with direct organizations via that sort of interface. And then lastly, I want to just talk a little bit about how we've been responding to this pandemic. What you see right there on the screen is our current homepage. Most of the Edge programs that we offer are customized for a particular university and are only available to people at that university. But right now we are offering 2 completely free and open access Edge programs as part of our Facing Pandemic series. One of them is called Solidarity and Storytelling Across Differences, and the other is called Grassroots NGO and CBO Resilience. I invite all of you to check them out. You can just go to our homepage or see the link at the bottom of this page. But if nothing else, it gives you and your students a really robust way to engage with some critical questions around COVID-19 and thinking about the implications of this pandemic for different structural inequalities and broader axes of difference. But beyond that, it might also give you just a flavor of, oh, give me one second, go back please, Saleha. But beyond that, it gives you a little bit of a flavor of just what this online learning platform looks like and how you might be able to adapt that for your own students. The other thing I want to point out in that pink text on the page is we have adapted very quickly to be able to offer a lot of different online volunteering and internship opportunities with our partners around the world. So obviously we recognize that even though for the last 15 years, one of the main ways that our partners use Prakash is by recruiting volunteers and interns who are going to get on an airplane and come travel to work with them. That is obviously not happening right now and probably not going to be happening for a while, but we already have this infrastructure of the platform and the partner network. So we've been adapting it to offer more online volunteering and internships. I'd love to tell you more, but hopefully that gives you a taste. And now I'm really excited to hand it over to Ben, who is a colleague of ours. And Ben will be telling you about how we've been using the Prakash network as the sort of basis for doing some pretty cool research.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Willie. Willie talked about Prakash's digital learning platform, and I'm going to hit a little bit more on the research side, because also with these ethical engagements, we, as a researcher, I think a lot about how to engage communities ethically, and I think Prakash, in some ways, has pushed me and my colleague to think more about how to do this well. So I work at the School of Social Work. I study and teach on social entrepreneurship, but also my colleague and I received a grant from the Social Science Research Council of Canada to study gender equality and how that interfaces with student mobility, so international volunteering, international service learning. And we knew about Prakash and met at a conference and knew that they had access to partners on the ground. And so we're interested in partnering with Prakash on this research project. And one of the things that impressed me and also that I appreciated and respected about Prakash with this project is that we approached them about this proposal that we had, and they pushed back, and basically, essentially the message was, what would our partners get from participating in this research? I think often, especially with North-South research partnerships, we don't necessarily give partners enough autonomy and ownership of projects. We don't necessarily think about how they are equitable and what the partners are getting from this project. And so Prakash and their team went back and talked with some partners, also talked with each other, and came back with a counter proposal of working with the partners and with us on this proposal. Later brought about 5 of their partners together. We had conversations over a couple of days about the viability of this research project. And essentially, in the end, came up with a project where the partners were driving a lot of the process through an open proposal process that Prakash put out. So if we can go to the next slide, this partnership, the research partnership is on 4 themes of gender equality, social innovation, digital learning using the platform that Willie talked about, and then transnational flows. And I know this is a lot of different topics, which is why I think with the open call, it was really interesting, and really we learned a lot from seeing what the partners' proposals were as they submitted their own research proposals for engaging in this research. Next slide. So just some core features of this program. Number 1, the priorities are led by the Prakash partners on the ground. So they are practice-based. The intention is to strengthen research capacities on the ground. And it's not top-down as a lot of the projects that university professors, certainly and academics, engage in happen to be, but it's really based on what their priorities are from the partners on the ground. Using the Prakash online learning platform allows us to engage in both research and learning, so it's bidirectional learning. Some of the Prakash Edge mentors, which are part of the program, as well as student volunteer, well, not necessarily volunteers, student research assistants and volunteers can engage in the research as well. And ultimately, this will generate data that we can use for the process of the research, but also that clearly provides some benefit to the partners on the ground. Next slide. And so, yeah, we basically around these broad themes, a few of the outcomes that we're hoping to achieve, clearly to build some capacity for research on the professional skills of the partners so that they're benefiting from this, to understand new models and innovations around gender equality programming that we don't necessarily know about, but the partners have experimented with and are innovating with right now as we speak. And then to ultimately engage in the cycle of practice so that we can reflect on what we are doing and aren't doing well, engaging some dialogue and some action around that. And I think Willie had also mentioned this online resilience platform that they have right now. In some ways, that was really fortuitous for us because we can learn from what the partners are experiencing now as they struggle with this pandemic and all the issues around COVID that a lot of the community-based organizations are really struggling with now, and can also fold that into our research. So it's quite fortuitous, and really grateful for Prakash for, in some ways, pushing back on the ethical engagement, but also teaching us in some ways how to do this better. And that's it for me.
Okay.
Thanks, Ben. I'll just add a brief final comment there about the Gettelsid project, and then, yeah, we'd love to open it up for questions. But the ironic thing is, you have to picture about a year ago, Ben and some other colleagues and I were sitting around saying, oh yeah, we should do this research about social innovation in the Global South. And in a ironic way, at the time, a year ago, that may have seemed somewhat contrived. Outside of the Ashoka circles where everyone's talking about innovation, one might say, oh, well, what makes you think everyone's innovating or something? The ironic thing is that COVID-19 is literally forcing every single organization in the world to innovate and to say, how do we adapt to these changing circumstances? And so we're just in the early stage of this Gettelsid program. And as Ben said, we have 5 main participating organizations, but in the broader open access resilience classroom that Prakash is running, there's over 150 participants from 38 countries who have just joined in the last 2 weeks that are joining this classroom to share how they are adapting to the challenges posed by COVID-19. So in that sense, this research project, I think, is going to give all of us a really interesting opportunity to get a glimpse of how social innovation is kind of happening in real time all around us in the wake of this pandemic. So I think at this point, we would love any questions, whether specific for one of us or about the broader themes that we've been discussing throughout this panel.
So Michelle was supposed to, Michelle had said she was going to be monitoring all the questions and all of that for us. Michelle, are you there?
Yes, I am. And we didn't receive any questions through the chat, but if anyone wants to speak up or just send me something now, this would be the perfect time to ask any questions you might have.
I personally want to add that the Prakash platform is just very powerful. It's something that our students really need right now. With no internships, here is here is an open platform you can connect and really do something much beyond the classroom and beyond the 4 walls of your own university. We can't be there anyway, so why not connect and see what's available out there and take advantage of these opportunities. So thank you, Willie, for making this platform available to all of us faculty and for our students.
I think that's such an important point at this moment in time when we can't go around the corner to, engage in any kind of activity. We can actually travel anywhere in the world virtually. And so that really does give, I think it gives an important moment for Prakash. And I'm just so glad to see that you've stepped up and, essentially retooled for the pandemic in such a short amount of time.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, great. Alan Yu has asked a question, which I really appreciate. How do you foster empathy for cross-cultural collaboration given our lack of mobility at this time? I don't want to seem like somehow I think that our Edge online learning platform is the silver bullet answer to everything, but I would just say for the last 8 years, my colleagues and I have been working on building an online learning space that does exactly that. There's no lectures, there are no PowerPoints. This is not a content delivery platform. It's a space for dialogue and reflection and storytelling. And so for us, that's how we foster empathy, is that, you can put 1,000 students in the same Zoom room to listen to a lecture. I'm not sure that gets anywhere in terms of empathy, but our style, and again, I invite you to check out that link and enroll for free in one of our programs just to get a flavor for it. But there is content. There is like say on a given unit, there might be a video or an article or whatever. And then there are discussion prompts. And generally the first unit, the prompt is simply introduce yourself. So everyone introduce themselves. Now within the platform, there's also private chat functionality, group chat, video chats. There's lots of other ways for people to connect, but it starts out with people introduce themselves, and then you move through a certain curriculum progression. And in every unit, there's kind of a core essential question that people discuss asynchronously in our online forums. And that's another big point, because I think trying to do everything at the same time across time zones and shaky internet connections, it's often not worth it. So we do a lot with asynchronous learning, where I might post my response today, and then Alan, you come along and share your comments on my response on Monday, but I get an email notification, and I do think that builds some empathy and some sense of connection. And then crucially, most of our programs, after the kind of curricular component, we are giving students research and digital storytelling skills, so that then they can go out and document an issue. And in some cases that might be, document your social innovation or study the root cause of a social issue. Right now, for many people, it's like, document this pandemic, show us what COVID-19 looks like in your context. But so we have a storytelling platform that's really built into the whole EDGE program. And the idea is that rather than log in to listen to a lecture, I can log in and browse stories from different people around the world who are experiencing this pandemic differently. And again, I'm not claiming that we've got it figured out, but that is certainly, those are some of the ways that we've been trying to work to humanize digital learning and humanize what can otherwise be a somewhat demoralizing and sort of technocratic process.
And to speak to the ethical piece of that, I think, really, I think it's important that the discussions are not led by any particular organization. People can put up discussion questions, share stories from their context. And a lot of the organizations, so I've joined this network, are community-based organizations that are no longer necessarily receiving students, working with students, but are engaged still in the process of service delivery in a context where, they're experiencing similar problems, or maybe very different problems than we're experiencing here. So the fact that we can engage with people across the globe in a certain digital learning space, I think, is a really important part of the ethical engagement, and that it's not top down, but it's really just, it's people engaging with people.
And just to speak to the empathy piece of that question, I think that we're in a time in which the kind of prevailing climate is ripe for empathy, because there are so many people in so many terrible circumstances that if you just take a look at the news, you find so many you find so much evidence of people's situations in which your heart goes out to them. And I think that we're probably practicing empathy in many aspects of life right now. And if we can just carry that forward into our work, I think it would be very helpful. I don't know if I'm going off topic, but I know that my teaching practice has changed completely, because I now begin every class with questions about how everyone is doing, and really listening to the answers. And I think also, as we're all working from home, we begin to get insights into one another's lives that we never had before. So I think this idea of bringing the whole person to work and working with whole people is fostering a climate in which empathy can flourish.
So I see another question from Christina, which I really appreciate. How do you address and prepare students for power and privilege discussions when working across countries and cultures? I appreciate that so much, because that is just a huge thing that we focus on all the time. And I'll, at the risk of seeming a little bit facetious, or I'll tell you one way that you don't do it is by giving them like a one-day orientation. That it's just, it doesn't work that way. And I think if we want students to grapple deeply with really heavy questions about identity and difference, we need to be willing to dig in. And I think one thing that on an institutional level, I think universities need to be willing to give academic credit for that, because that's just one way that universities signify that this is important and is not sort of extracurricular. That's a separate point. And many of our university partnerships are accredited and many are not. But to get into the real meat of the question, most of our pre-departure programs, at least when we're allowed to do it as robust as we want, it's a full semester long. It's 12 to 14 weeks of online learning. Oftentimes that is done in a hybrid way where we partner with a faculty member on campus. So students are still meeting face-to-face in person, obviously not right now. But the faculty member doesn't need to invent the curriculum. We've already got it. We customize it as needed, but we've spent years developing this curriculum. So we save the faculty the time of needing to do that. And then we also create continuity where maybe there's no faculty who's going to do it and you just have a staff member kind of holding the space year to year. We've got the kind of shared curriculum, so they're not needing to reinvent the wheel every time. Generally speaking, we start out by asking students to reflect on their own assumptions and their own positionality. So we start by kind of looking inward, and the simple question of why do you want to do this thing? You know, build homes in Nicaragua, or go to the soup kitchen across town, or whatever it may be. Like, let's start with that. Why is it that you want to do that? And we kind of unpack that. We bring in some other content to help people reflect on how even a statement as simple as, oh, I just want to give back, or I just want to serve others. We highlight some of the ways that even that kind of seemingly innocuous statement can be patronizing and paternalistic and so on. Then we dig into the big question of sort of where are we and how did we get here, which is essentially trying to understand the last 60 plus years of international development and how it has landed us in a world that in many ways is more unequal than ever before. And we talk a lot about economic inequality, environmental inequality, and other forms of inequality. Then we talk about power through representation and storytelling. So we get into these questions of what's the difference between sort of a blog where you're just writing about what you think and what you did today versus a real polyvocal story where you are interviewing different people and documenting different perspectives. And rather than trying to figure out the one truth, you're trying to thicken our understandings of the diversity of human experiences and so on. So that's just kind of a glimpse, but the bigger picture is we think that when students are going off, whether it's for an architecture project or a social innovation or internship, when students are leaving campus physically or virtually and entering different contexts, these questions about power, privilege, identity, and difference are so ripe to explore. But in order to really do justice to them, we need to treat them like we treat other academic questions where there's a curriculum, there's pedagogy, there's intentionality, there's facilitation, there's discussion. And so often universities just say, oh, well, yeah, we agree that would be great, but we don't have time for that, or we don't have a faculty member who can do that, or how are we going to pay for that? So Prakash is trying to fill that gap and to say, hey, we can customize things as you want, but we've spent a lot of time thinking about how to help students grapple with differences of culture and power, and you don't need to start from scratch.
And just to add, one piece to that, I appreciate the question about preparing students, but I think the preparation is never adequate. Once students get out in the field, I've been surprised, students who have been in discussions about this way before they ever left, I'm sort of like, were you there? Like, were you listening? And so I think it's actually ongoing dialogue and reflection, especially when they're on the ground and they're making assumptions and you hear things that you want to confront. That kind of stuff is really important to do along the way. And I think the importance of having a platform where students engage consistently and constantly in this process while they're on the ground is also super important for actually changing minds and changing opinions about this.
The only thing I would add to that is that when you get students to recognize differences and begin to have some conversation about what values underpin those differences, I think that one of the valuable lessons is that it tends to cause students to look inwards and examine what their own values are and why they, behave differently, believe differently, and so forth. So, I think that just act of understanding that people, have different situations, different beliefs, different responses, and so forth, is very useful for spurring reflection and a greater understanding of one's own culture, including it, the kind of foundational privileges that make our lives the way they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, everyone, I'm just going to cut in really quickly. I think this is a really good time for all of you to share any other resources and information just before we finish up. Just wanted to put out the reminder.
Right. Well, I think there was one more question for Willie.
Yeah, it's a big question from Jim. What does success look like in Om Prakash 15 years from now? One thing I'll share is that in 2019, which was our 15-year anniversary, that was our first year of being financially self-sustaining, where our earned revenue has, we've eliminated dependency on donors, and we're able to channel all donor funds towards grant and scholarship programs, but all of our basic operations are, we're able to support with sustainable revenue. So for a long time, that was kind of the big goal, was let's get there, and now we're there. So it is exactly the right time to be asking, all right, well, how about 15 years from now? My most concise answer would just be, it's multifaceted, but transforming the landscape of global engagement in higher education to be more ethical, more accessible, and more rigorously educational. And that's the work we're trying to do every day. But when I look at this landscape, of which Ashoka U is certainly a part of it, but I just see so many programs that are founded on a lack of real ethical consideration, a lack of deep knowledge and understanding about power and difference, a lack of rigorous pedagogy, and a really high price tag. And so we're trying to change all that and make it way more affordable and accessible, way more deep critical reflection, and really founded in ethical relationships with autonomous organizations around the world that are doing real social impact work rather than with tour operators. So that's the landscape that we're trying to change. Thank you for the question, Jim.
Great. Any other questions? Wow, we have such great discussion. Thank you. And let's give a round of applause to all our phenomenal speakers and to this session, which is fits in so well with the Ashoka team.
Thank you, Saleha, and thank you for joining us. I hope everyone has a great evening and enjoy your peer huddles that are closing out.